This Week in Richmond is made possible in part by Dignity Memorial, caring for our communities with a network of funeral homes and cemeteries in Virginia and throughout North America. More information about Dignity Memorial's providers is online at dignitymemorial.com. The Virginia Chamber of Commerce, the voice of the Virginia business community, working in legislative, regulatory, and political arenas to promote the free enterprise system. Information at vachamber.com. Virginia hospitals and health systems provide jobs. They support our economy and promote public health. Local hospitals are always open to help people with unexpected health needs. Having a stable healthcare network is vital. Virginia hospitals are our lifeline.
I just received a letter from a student who thanked me for instilling the love of math in him. That's why I teach.
Brought to you by the Virginia Education Association, because a good education is good for everybody.
Additional support is provided by these sponsors. And by the members of Virginia's public television stations. Thank you.
Welcome to This Week in Richmond. A very special welcome back to Brian Moran. We very much appreciate your being here from the House of Delegates and from the work you've done, the Governor's Cabinet and Public Safety and Homeland Security. Appreciate your being here. We were talking just a few moments ago before we started the show that this is the hurricane season coming on, and so I thought we would start with some information that you could provide, and there's some clips that will go up on the screen, and telling people about that before we move into a multiple other subjects.
Oh, there's a lot to discuss,
Yes.
but nothing more important than natural disasters and hurricanes. Certainly, with our proximity to the coast, we are in line for hurricanes every year, and certainly folks in the Hampton Roads region are very attuned to that. So, hurricane season begins June 1st, extends right up until November 1st. Early on in the McAuliffe administration, in fact, the first few months, we brought on a new statewide coordinator, Jeff Stern. And one of our first cabinet meetings, we met over at the Emergency Operations Center, and we wanted to discuss hurricane preparedness. And we walked through the plan, and the plan was for evacuation. And anyone who has been on Route 64 on a Saturday or Sunday afternoon knows the challenge that would occur trying to evacuate the Hampton Roads region. In addition, in the summertime, you're going to have folks who are visiting the Outer Banks in North Carolina coming up through Virginia to move. So evacuation as a sole preparedness function really was deficient. And so we asked Jeff Stern to work with all of the local communities and emergency managers to come up with a more comprehensive approach that would frankly be more effective to prepare for hurricane and ensure the safety of our citizens and visitors in the Hampton Roads region. And so sure enough, this year we announced a new initiative called Know Your Zone. And the idea being that you're living in the Hampton Roads region, you're in a particular, Virginia Beach and Norfolk, particular neighborhoods, and you'll have a zone, 1, 2, 3 or 4, actually A, B, C, or D. But, and it takes into account sea level rise and storm surge, because the deaths we've found really come from storm surge and flooding as opposed to the high winds, though high winds are obviously dangerous with trees and whatnot. But so this is a matter, some folks will shelter in place if you're on higher ground. Others will be asked to evacuate based on low-lying areas. And so that's Know Your Zone, and we announced it, and that is an ongoing education effort in the Hampton Roads region. And hopefully it's always best to be prepared, David, and hopefully, prepare for the worst and pray for the best. And we'll see how the storm season goes. National Weather Service says there will be a number of named storms this season. Whether they come and impact us or not, we have to see. But we want to be prepared as best as possible and ensure the safety of our citizens and our visitors.
I think our viewers are seeing those zones and
Good.
probably seeing the website knowyourzoneva.org,
Right.
that they can go on that, or call 211 if they don't have access to a computer and want
Right.
to make note of that.
Yep, yep.
You know, the other interesting thing I thought in seeing that is that there are people in the central part of the state and the western part of the state where they're not as likely to have another one that hits Nelson County or other places,
that was
but where
devastating.
they'll have people that would be potentially evacuating and needing to move on beyond the capital city to move to a place for housing if that should occur. So
Well, in this job I've learned this is not just Hampton Roads. In fact, any and every part of Virginia is vulnerable to some sort
Right.
of disaster. Certainly hurricanes is prominent in the Hampton Roads region, but even then, as you say, Nelson County had a devastating hurricane
Yes.
years past. But we have flooding in Southwest Virginia. We've been out to Wise County several times for flooding from heavy rains, but then also snowfall. And then, of course, there are man-made disasters. You know, we're very concerned about terrorism in Northern Virginia and throughout Virginia. And so, you know, there's no region that is immune from either natural or man-made disasters. So we call upon all of our communities to prepare and be well trained, and actually, and then individuals should be well, make a plan for disaster. Friends and family and your pet dog, and where will be a rendezvous point if something were to occur.
Yes.
You know, we've had
Yes.
a number of tornadoes this year. We've had a number of tornado disasters this year, and they're subject to anywhere in Virginia. You know, we've had them in Appomattox to Essex to Emporia. So that again, really each individual should have a plan in the case of a disaster. And as a state, we are working very closely with our local emergency managers, giving whatever state assistance is necessary for the proper preparation and response.
You know, with all the uncertainty about federal budget, it was good to see that Virginia got some special grants for emergency preparedness grants just recently. That news was out. So that's money that's coming now that will be very much helpful.
Yeah, there's a lot of angst right now about the proposed federal budget, but as of last year, and those federal funds are now being received by the state and then distributed, and we did receive over $34 million in those grants. In our localities, many of which really depend on these grants to make the necessary preparations, because they do not have the resources themselves, and so we do rely on federal grants, and we'll distribute them to the localities. So we're very appreciative of that, those grants to Virginia, and we do our best to maximize our grants as well. We put a lot of work and effort into maximizing the grant proposals, and we do very well. You mentioned emergency management. In the Department of Criminal Justice Services, we just received $83 million in grants for criminal justice, victim witness programs, helping out law enforcement, shelters. So we just received a tremendous amount of resources for victim witness programs and in our criminal justice system. So very pleased about that. Again, maximizing those federal resources to supplement what state aid we have in addition to local resources.
There's nothing like being prepared. They really need the preparedness.
Well, and again,
those funds help.
and I can't emphasize enough, it's all of our responsibilities. Each individual needs to have a plan. It was interesting, one of the first assignments of this job, myself and Jeff Stern, emergency manager, went and briefed the president himself, President Obama, in early 2014, and Virginia was asked to come. We were the only state there to talk to him about what we're doing in Virginia in terms of using social media, using the apps that are on your phone, the emergency alert systems. We're trying to be very innovative, creative, to ensure that everyone is notified and educated as to what they should be doing in preparation. But then if a disaster were to occur, what to do in the event of a disaster. And so we're trying to be ahead of the curve, and I think Know Your Zone is a part of that. We're using the latest and greatest technology and information that we have from the National Weather Service. So, so I think, but you never know what can occur. But please, really strongly encourage folks. Each individual should have a plan, and their family, friends, including the pet dog, know where you'll go in case of an emergency. Families and friends. So, yep.
Well, in public safety and Homeland Security had you back up in Northern Virginia in that terrible shooting that took place.
This summer is just, it hasn't started well, David. We just had a horrible, a madman with a weapon who shot at a number of congressmen up in the city of Alexandria, where I have spent almost 30 years of my life. I know that area very, very well. Played on the Simpson Field, and that was just horrible. The community really came together. I mean, they're shocked at what happened. Everybody is, and horrible act of violence. And long before that, we lost one of our best and the brightest, State Trooper Walter, special agent up here in Richmond. Dangerous activity, and was shot and killed in the line of duty, and just horrible situation. Wife and 3 children, young kids. So, it's been. And there's an increase in violent crime going on, and it's not just in Virginia; it's across the country. We have the heroin increased deaths. I think a lot of the violent crime is attributable to that. These, sellers of these drugs, the dangerous people, and so it's so far it's been a long summer in terms of these sorts of tragedies, and the good part of it, we have wonderful law enforcement, well trained folks who care deeply about their communities, and we're going to do everything we can from the state to provide assistance. We have a wonderful Virginia State Police, but it's painful to see these sorts of tragic events.
Now, there are some instances, and certainly in your secretariat, where there's public-private partnerships that develop. Tell us one about the one in the Department of Criminal Justice Services and Constitutional Law up in Montpelier, where they're working together. It's good. It's good.
That's
to get
a good segue. That's better news, David.
Yes.
I know.
Get into some good news, and where the private sector's involved too. That it's not all federal, state, and local money. Sometimes it's private.
People stepping up.
Yes.
The Montpelier Madison Society, they're stepping up. I think it's a great idea. And Doug Smith and joined me and the Lieutenant Governor Ralph Northam just recently to announce this constitutional law course for law enforcement.
Yes.
So our police and first responders can learn about the Constitution. There's so much going on now, David, that all of this new technology, for instance. There's always been issues around search and seizure, and can an officer come up and ask you for identification? If you refuse, what can the officer do then? And something called stop and frisk. So a lot of concepts within the law around those issues in search and seizure and Fourth Amendment law. But those issues are even now being challenged because of the new technologies. We have unmanned vehicles now, flying vehicles without people. They're called drones, of course. And drone can go up, police can send it up, and they can start taking a look at your big marijuana plant field in your backyard. Mm-hmm. Is that a search and seizure? Is that reasonable? And so there's any number of issues that the new technologies is, technology in terms of surveillance on your phone, and what requirements of police made to meet to before they can implement and use those types of technologies. So it's a fascinating, as a lawyer, as someone who's a prosecutor, and a defense attorney, and a policymaker, I find it fascinating. I really enjoy it. So I was very pleased to be involved in it, and I think it's a great thing. I really congratulate Doug Smith and others at Montpelier and James Madison for taking this over and offering this course, because police want to take it. You know, our police want to do right by the citizens they protect and serve. So, you know, they're looking forward to learning these new concepts as well, many of which are not new, but how to implement them with changing technology. So it's fascinating. I'm very pleased.
I thought that was one of the most creative approaches, and particularly coming out of that center, which is just a logical place for it to do it. And so I'm just hoping that they'll invite some media up there, whether it's This Week in Richmond or other ones, to come in as they move on through it, to really, you know, in a sense, to help educate the rest of us who are not attorneys or not law enforcement, but
well, and akin to that, there was a legislation that passed this session. The governor signed it, sponsored by Juwan Ward, where folks now taking your learning how to drive, your driving courses. Okay. My daughter's 16 and she just went through that course. Now will include a component to say, what are you supposed to do when stopped by a police officer? You know, we've had a number of instances, fortunately not, you know, in Virginia, but around the country, where you've seen the interaction go badly, and so that's now part of your driving course. I think that's fascinating. I don't know why it wasn't before.
I know.
Not that I'd ever get stopped by a police officer, but for my 16-year-old, I'd like her to know what you were supposed to do if you're stopped. So, you know, that's I thought that was a good piece of legislation. The governor signed it. We have finished up all of our bills now. The governor has done all the ceremony bill signings. They all become effective July 1. Most laws become effective July 1. That's unless there's an exception. So a lot of new laws come July 1. And we had a very, very productive legislative session in public safety. We worked very well with our Republican colleagues, and we've been able to accomplish a lot in public safety. And, you know, you have budget issues every year.
Yes.
You know, I always want to have more money for our Department of Corrections and give our correctional officers more better pay. Our state troopers did get better pay this year, which is huge, big celebration there. But there's any number of things we could do in public safety if you had unlimited resources. You don't have unlimited resources. And so we make do with what we have. And then, of course, there's the other challenges. You have a Republican legislature, both Senate and the House, and you have to work together. So I love Richmond, because you got to work together. You know, there's none of this just, you know, press release after press release haranguing the other side. Here in Virginia, with Governor McAuliffe's leadership and the Republican leadership, we come together, especially around public safety issues. So, you know, I was thrilled with the legislative sessions we've had and what we've been accomplished in the area of public safety.
I'm glad you bring up, and I'm glad every time a guest brings up the fact that people here in Richmond do work together. Have some disagreements, to be sure, have differences of opinion, but things happen, and unfortunately, too many of us out in the public only hear about the fights and never hear about the other successes. So
well, that does have to say a little with the media. The media likes a fight, you know, that sells papers.
Sells papers.
Getting along with folks, you know, that doesn't lead the story. But I'll tell you, in public safety, you know, we have a hard-charging governor. You know, the governor makes no apologies for being a Democrat, and he's a hard charger. But at the end of the day, around public safety issues and making sure our citizens are safe and our law enforcement's respected, you know, we've come together with Republicans and gotten a lot done. Driving license suspension.
I was going to ask you about that one, because that's an interesting one.
This has been an issue, David, we've discussed for years and years. You know, we have 680,000 individuals who have a license suspended because they haven't been able to pay fines and costs. Yeah. Then we have another over 200,000 that have their licenses suspended for non-motor vehicle related offenses. Now, a lot of that is you haven't paid your child support, you get your license suspended. You have a marijuana possession, you get your license suspended. Over 200,000. And you add up the other 600, you know, 800,000 of our Virginia, that's 10% of our population. Our licenses are suspended. So, you know, that's a danger, because a lot of these folks are still driving, and they probably don't have insurance now. And so it's a public safety concern. That's where we were coming up. And in addition to just being an issue around really. There's some areas in the Commonwealth you can't take a bus. You don't have a metro like in Northern Virginia. You got to drive to work to provide for your family.
Yeah. So
And
what was the outcome there? What did you work out on that?
we made progress. We made substantial progress. A number of delegates came together. The governor wanted to not suspend the license of a non-pay fee. So we start here, and oftentimes there's legislation ends up down
Sure.
here, but you got to start up here.
Right.
And so what we ended up was a better payment plan, much more ambitious in terms of folks. If they pay as little as 5% of what their outstanding fines and costs, they can enter a payment plan which will allow them to keep their license valid so they can drive. And so it's not as far as we wanted to go, but it's a step, definitely a step in the right direction. So that'll become effective, and hopefully folks will get into that payment plan, keep their license, and that way you can gradually pay off your fines and costs.
Okay, what about boards of corrections bills that you had, maybe on the review of jails deaths? Or?
Yep. All right, so another issue, the big issue here is, our largest mental health institutions have become our local jails.
Yes.
We don't have any place to put them. The community services are lacking, and folks are ending up in our jails who have mental illness. Our sheriffs want to do right by them. We're trying to provide them the services. The governor put in several $1 million for community services, so you have same-day service. If you have, have an outbreak, you can go somewhere that day to get,
Right.
acute service. So, but on the jail situation, that's the big picture. The specifics are we had a horrible death in the Hampton Roads Regional Jail. So Michael Mitchell died, starvation, and horrible. Everybody felt terrible about that tragedy. And so, as it turns out, we couldn't assess accountability. Who's investigating it? The Office of Inspector General really didn't have statutory authority. State police was called in to investigate, but that's a criminal investigation. Right. And so, that we were left with, well, wow, there's really no one that has the accountability or obligation to do a review of a jail death that's suspicious. And so we went about working with the Deeds Commission, Senator Deeds, Rob Bell, and we put together a piece of legislation that now specifically assigns responsibility and duty to the Board of Corrections, which is already existing, but they didn't have the statutory authority. Now it does. And we're also changing the board's composition. A lot of these boards and commissions are wonderful people that serve, but they don't necessarily have the background to provide the expertise in a particular. Right. So we're changing the composition of the board, and we've given them specific duty to investigate suspicious jail deaths or review the jail deaths. And so we're very proud of that legislation. It came from a horrible horrible situation in Hampton Roads Regional Jail, but we worked with our Sheriff's Association, we worked with the Regional Jails Association. So I think ended up at the end of the day consensus. So everybody's on board, and now we're all going to work together to make sure it's effective and it works. Good.
Well, in our last minute or so, what about law enforcement peer support?
Time flies.
Yes, it does.
Time flies here. So, peer support.
Yes.
Senator Bill Carrico, former state trooper, carried legislation. The governor signed it. A lot of fanfare. Folks came together. It's long overdue. And what it says is, these troopers and law enforcement, first responders, they have a tough job.
Yes.
And they come upon some horrible scenes of either death or injury or themselves being injured in a very traumatic situation. And we want to make sure that they have support. And so the bill says peer support. You can go to somebody now, and now that's confidential. The worry was that you could go to somebody and there's no confidentiality of it, and so it really was a chilling effect on folks who, if I'm not confidential, I'm not going to pour my heart out to you. And so, these are kind of macho fellas, and so the governor signed that. I think it's a wonderful idea to give that type of peer support to folks. It's a dangerous job, and we've just seen it over the course of our administration. The number of deaths, it's horrible, and the tragedies they have to respond to. So
Secretary
I want to
Moran,
support them.
time again has run
Yep,
out.
flown.
We will
All
have you
right.
back on
We've
again.
covered a lot of subjects,
Yes,
though.
we will.
Yeah.
Thank you very
Good
much.
job, David. Thank you.
This Week in Richmond is made possible in part by Dignity Memorial, caring for our communities with a network of funeral homes and cemeteries in Virginia and throughout North America. More information about Dignity Memorial's providers is online at dignitymemorial.com. The Virginia Chamber of Commerce, the voice of the Virginia business community. For jobs, the economy, and public health, Virginia Hospitals, our lifeline.
The Virginia Education Association, because a good education is good for everybody.
Additional support is provided by these sponsors. And by the members of Virginia's public television stations. Thank you.